my spooky friends. I'm John, your host, and welcome to another episode of Dairyland Frights, the paranormal podcast that covers everything spooky, creepy, and mysterious in the Midwest and beyond. And the great spooky guests continue. I have on the podcast author Aaron Ryan. He's an award-winning and best-selling author. Welcome, Aaron. I love the
How
way.
you doing? Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was
I
the
love the
Regal
royal
elbow.
way. So let me ask you a couple questions here to start off the bat here. You have written a number of really interesting books I got to take a look at, by the way. But one thing I noticed in here, you are a man of many talents. You have been a voiceover artist, a musician, stage performer, producer, videographer, executive assistant, paperboy. Hey,
Oh yeah.
what's a paperboy, Aaron? What do they do?
What's a paper?
What's a paper? That's crazy. I love this. I took this from Aaron's bio, and he just put down all these great experiences. I love Paperboy because I'm like, does anybody even know what a paper is anymore? Maybe you and me, but so you
Hey,
have.
times have changed, but I mean that was an illustrious career for a teenager.
I love it. And you're very eclectic, as I'd like to say. I use my fancy author word there for you. You
Yeah.
had just a really great, I love tech support too, by the way. I love it. So you've had a very varied life, which I think, in my opinion, is good for an author to experience things, right? Like experience different things that you can put that yourself or that character in your book of like, hey, maybe a paper boy, you can tell me about your book here in a little bit, maybe a paper boy saves the world, who knows, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a great children's book. I'm working on some children's books right now for my kiddos and beyond. So,
Yes, there you go. There's your $1 million idea. I'll take 10%.
there you go.
Anyway, I love it. You have just, it looks like you have a fun life. I love some of your authors too. We share, I like Tom Clancy, Michael Crichton, John Grisham, C.S. Tolkien or Tolkien, however you would like to pronounce him. I love that.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you off the bat, what inspired you to become an author? I'm always fascinated by that.
Honestly, I mean, we were just talking about him. So I was given a task in I always want to say eighth grade. That's erroneous. At age 8 in second grade, this is in 1981, but we don't have to say the year because it dates me like horrendously. But I was given this task to put together some kind of assignment with college rule paper, 3-line paper, and 3-hole punch and all that, crude stick figure drawings and everything. And I wrote it. And it was the Electric Boy. It was really heavily influenced by E.T. because E.T. had come out back then, and all the youngins are going, "What's E.T.?" It just really inspired me then to create. But then I don't know when it was. You'd think it was cemented in my mind, but shortly thereafter, I laid eyes for the very first time on The Lord of the Rings, not The Hobbit, but The Lord of the Rings, and I dove in there and then went back to The Hobbit, and I just went. I mean, my mind was absolutely, utterly, and indefatigably blown. What is this? It was so
Yeah,
huge and so rich with meaning and world building and everything. And I thought, I don't know that I'd ever be able to approach that level of narrative writing majesty, but I thought I'd love to give it a try someday. And Dissonance falls dreadfully short. Everything I've written falls dreadfully short of Tolkien. But that was my main inspiration, was Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And that book, I think, propelled numerous movies, book. I mean, just like you said, world building, putting things out there. And like in the world of the paranormal with cryptids and all these other things, other worlds, so on and so forth, portals. I mean, it's wild to the imagination of number one, how he came up with all this stuff. And some of it was, coming from Vikings, from English lore, from, a number of different.
Norse.
Yeah, but you still have to put it all together, which is harder than you think, folks. A lot harder than you think.
A lot harder.
And, that's what I think really, really makes people interested in like what's out there, right? Like, is there something more? Is there a bunch of elves? Are there, a giant eye looking at us? You know what I mean? I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of memes that are basically like, "Hey, they're putting up a new T-Mobile tower or AT&T tower at the end of my street," and it's basically this, this what's the word? It's basically just this black obelisk going up with the fiery eye in the middle, and you're not going to get any signal from that. But I love that they just draw this instant comparison of this
Yeah,
draconian signal that's going to be broadcast everywhere. It's Sauron, so
yeah.
no one's getting out of there.
So let's get into it. Why don't you talk a little bit about, Dissonance and some of your books and what kind of gave you, again, what inspired you to write these? Because you can write about anything as a writer, right? You can, whatever you want to write about, you can write about. But what made you go like, "Oh, yeah, let me try this, see how this goes."
Yeah. Well, so number one, my all-time favorite movie is Aliens. I'm sure it's yours as well. I just watched it again today with friends. We had a specifically Aliens viewing day.
Love it.
1986, Sigourney Weaver. Just it's got everything. Everything about it is cool. Nothing about it sucks, except for the fact that Vasquez dies, and I just want to stop watching it there. But it's just amazing in every way. I love the movie, and I've always wanted to write a book that dealt with aliens somehow. Where it crossed over a bit of a threshold was it wasn't basically us going to war with aliens on some other planet. It was we had just watched I Am Legend the night before, my wife and I'd seen it before. But what I love about I Am Legend is, granted, this isn't a post-apocalyptic scenario that
Hmm.
deals with a virus, rabies, spreading all over the planet and killing off, you know, almost everybody except for Will Smith and his dog. And when you take the custodians out of the way, when humans are removed from the picture, it becomes really just a graveyard, a ghost town, and a
Hmm.
really scary situation to be in. And I
Right.
thought, what if I could write a story that dealt with a post-apocalyptic scenario like that, where the custodians are removed and weeds are growing up through the cracks. They're 5 feet tall now. There's beehives the size of VW bugs. And what would that look like except caused by aliens? The causality was an alien invasion. So
Yeah.
I wanted to write a single book. As I was writing it, I believe in about chapter 4, I realized there's a subtle undercurrent of a greater story here. And I followed it, and it just ballooned into a trilogy that then required 2 prequels and then birthed a sequel. So it turned into a hexalogy before I even knew it. I'm very proud of it. It's loaded with thematic depth and just a great, great story.
Yeah, it looks to me. I love your little tagline, as they would say in the biz. We thought they were angelic messengers. We were wrong. I love that. I love that because we'll get to it a little bit here because I'll ask you something. But before I'm gonna stop for a second. I'll let you still talk about your books because that's why you're here. But I have to ask you, since this is a paranormal podcast, have you ever had a paranormal dream or event or something happen to you?
Yes, I've never had anything in the flesh, in my waking life where I've actually encountered something like that. Although as a kid, you want it to be, something under the bed, or you want it to be something that's like some kind of experience that you just really can't define. But I'm also a spiritual guy, and I think some of those things could very well have been something from the spiritual realm, which often, one's going to get confused for the other. I would love to say that I saw Bigfoot in the woods. I would love to say that I saw a UFO. And what's funny is when I do these vendor markets and craft fairs, I've got one coming up on Friday, Saturday. I have my banners up that clearly advertise Alien Invasion,
Yeah, yeah,
book
yeah.
series. And I get all kinds of people that come up to me and they go, "Yeah, dude, I was abducted and I was brought up aboard their vessel, and they did all kinds of things on me, man." And I'm like, all these people, potential buyers of my books, are walking by, and this guy's occupying my time, and I'm like, yeah, just could you come back? Okay, come back, come back. So it's not an uncomfortable topic, but it's kind of one of those topics where I'm like, man, I have nothing to offer in that regard. I wish I
Yeah,
did.
yeah. And
Yet,
you, yeah, go ahead.
yet.
Yeah. But let me ask you this. Do you believe in the paranormal? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in spirits? Things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're far too the universe is far too big to just limit us to this single dimension that we know, this plane that we're on. And I think that they do intersect, and that's why you have such creative stories that take such hold of us, like Sixth Sense or something like that, where things cross over. I mean, our kids love the movie Coco, and it's Pixar. I think that it's absolutely true. I don't have much knowledge on the subject of the other side.
Yeah. And that to me is what's interesting to me about this is everyone I talk to, and you probably are the same way. You believe in it, but you're a little skeptical, right? You're kind of like, okay, because a lot of stuff on YouTube, like you're talking to the guy, hey man, a lot of guys that just get a camera, oh my God, there's a demon, and they go running, you're like, oh, you're ruining it for all of us, paranormal investigators, and they're like, you just made my job a million times harder because they're legitimately going in and getting this evidence and getting voices and seeing things and trying to debunk it and trying to say, oh, it was a dust particle or it was the
Yeah.
wind or it was that. And some of it I don't know, right? You just don't know. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember as a kid watching something like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and being utterly infatuated by that movie. I'm very nostalgic, so I'll watch, Close Encounters of the Third Kind before I'll watch something like Independence Day or
Yeah.
Arrival or something like
Uh,
that, or Interstellar. I think they're all so cool and they're so amazing to behold, but there was a guy who said he was talking in Close Encounters about having encountered Bigfoot, and it made a sound I would not want to hear twice in my lifetime. I remember that line. I'll never forget
mm-hmm.
that line. And when the aliens pull the little boy out through the doggy door, and the mom is crying and desperately trying to yank him back, and then the visitation of all the ships at Devil's Tower at the end in the climactic sequence. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that it's such a draw. We always fear what we don't know or don't
Absolutely.
understand. The aliens and all that kind of stuff are things we just simply don't understand. So
Absolutely.
there's curiosity around it.
So let's get into that a little bit. When you were researching your book, it's hard to research in the sense of, like it's a Tom Clancy book. You can go and you can like, hey, here's a bunch of blueprints and plans, and here's the general
Yeah.
to talk to you about World War II or whatever, and you can talk to Navy SEALs. But in your case, you can't really go around the corner and be like, oh, there's an alien. Hey, I'm Aaron. I want to talk to you about what you would do. I'm just kind of curious. You know what I'm saying? So, how did you go about that process other than imagination, which is great? What did you do for research? Did you look at some tapes? What did you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did a tremendous amount of research on the books themselves in terms of the military, because the military is like, bar none, the one who's had the most interaction with aliens that we know of due to Area 51 and the secrets that we suppose are there. So I had to do a lot of research as far as how the military would be dealing with these alien invaders. I had to do a lot of research in terms of what life would be like in 2042 and 2026 when they came. I had to do a lot of research on the types of after effects that would happen were we to be invaded, and was society to just be absolutely leveled by an alien threat. Um, the sixth installment, which is it became a hexalogy last November, and I published volume 4, Relentless. So volume 4, it's a weird numerical, volume naming convention that I used. Next time I'll do it differently. But volume 4 is actually the sixth installment in Dissonance. Anyway, what I had to do was explore the aliens, the Gorgons' origin more.
Mhm.
Where did they come
Right,
from? Why did they
right.
come? What the heck do they want with us other than food and water? What's their motivation? This and that. So I had to do a lot of research into a solar system that wouldn't be too far away, that we could actually track movement and incoming, see, estimated time of arrival for the return of them. And so I came up with the TRAPPIST-1 system, which is 39 light years away, and did a lot of research on that to make sure that it was accurate. Contact with Jodie Foster, that movie really helped.
Oh, yes.
Um, Great movie, and I actually I had to be really careful not to copy some of the
Yeah.
dialogue and the verbiage that they use word for word because it sounds so authentic.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this again, just reading through the summary and things here I have in front of me. One of the things they use is telepathy, and you said they paralyze us, which I love that, by the way. And think how scary that is. I mean, I love that you came up with that. Think about, so this is maybe similar to it. So I've spoken to people who have had sleep paralysis. Okay, and someone who has sleep paralysis every night here. So they go through this every night. I can't even wrap my mind around it, right? How scary that is, because I've had it once. And I remember not being able to move. I remember seeing some terrible things and feeling scared and helpless. Like
Yeah.
that, how did you decide? Because there's a million things an alien can do, right? There's aliens who've had ray guns. Oh boy, am I dating myself on that? Alien has acid, right?
Yep.
Aliens who have they just kind of explode your brain kind of thing. They can do different things, right? How did you settle on this? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I actually, what I've always been terrified by, and depends if you remember this far back, but a lot of people have not seen it except for the new one. Clash of the Titans in 1981 had a claymation Medusa, stop motion photography Medusa, and I was all of 7 years old, 8 years old. And I'll never forget just being absolutely terrified by that Medusa when Perseus's soldier is discovered by her. She pulls out an arrow out of her quiver. She fires it at him. He falls over, turns, gasps, looks at her. And she comes into frame with her eyes glowing bright green. And there's this high, musical strain, this clashing dissonant pitch. Oh my gosh, just freaked me out as a kid. And I thought, interestingly, when I first started writing the book, the Gorgons, they weren't called Gorgons there, they were called Druids initially, and they were far too akin to like a cross between a Nazgul and a Dementor. And you know, been done. Everybody's been done that. I didn't want to repeat the cycle, and kind of I needed something unique.
Yeah.
So I they were a little too ethereal of a form, and ethereal of a threat, vaporous and kind of intangible. I needed something that was more predatorial, more flesh and bone, so that human beings actually had a chance to fight back. And that's when I decided to turn them into a tangible being and called them Gorgons, because that's our frame of reference. We see what they can do in terms of the hypnosis,
Yeah.
and it's terrifying. When I wrote the sections in any of the books where a human is set upon by a Gorgon, it's absolutely terrifying. The very first time they awaken is September 3rd, 2026, after they've been hanging in the sky 50 feet above the ground for 90 days all over the planet. They finally wake up and they attack. I literally needed to take a furlough from writing for a while because it was so psychologically terrifying.
Mm,
Uh,
mm. I love
they're
that. Yeah.
terrifying, and they're pretty unique that way.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Because again, here's two things. I'd like to kind of ask you some questions about just, I guess, we'll talk a little about aliens here in a little bit, but what inspired you to keep writing this too? I mean, because at any time you could have been like, "Whoa, this is too much," like you said. This is heavy. I'm gonna switch this. I'm gonna make they bring flowers and everybody bakes brownies or something. We just have a good old time. Like, what inspired you to like say, "Okay, we gotta talk about this invasion. We gotta talk about this," rather than go a million other directions.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, it's very hard to maintain writing a book. And I forget, I was seeing some stats maybe a few weeks ago where people were saying there's literally like less than 5% of people who start a book actually finish it.
Hmm.
I have a huge motivation right now in finishing my book because I'm a voiceover artist. There's my studio back there.
Okay.
And voiceovers, the industry itself is sincerely just crumbling under the weight of AI, lowballing clients, underbidding colleagues, the SAG-AFTRA strike, the economy. Just the list goes on, and the hits keep coming. And so I'm under tremendous pressure to pivot and adapt. So there really is no backing down. This is what I want to do. This is what I've been doing for years and years as a voiceover artist. I published 300 blogs that were largely satirical, a la Dave Barry. Um,
Nice.
Business reference, yes. Business guides and an affirmation that you can do this as a voiceover artist, sure. But they were very satirical, and satire is grounded in fiction. So a lot of, rabbit trails, fictional rabbit trails and stuff. So I was not inexperienced. I'd written fiction as a 20s something guy in the 90s, and I'd written all of these blogs and published 6 books that contained a lot of that satire. It wasn't alien territory. Ha, I see what I did there. It wasn't alien territory for me to return to fiction, but my motivation is simply just I want to provide for my family, and this is how I want to do it.
I
But
love it.
aside from that external pressure, the internal drive was like I couldn't stop writing. I couldn't stop. Writer's block is absolutely real. I do have respect for it for the people who struggle with it. I didn't struggle with it. It was just like every spare moment, I've got to let the fingers fly and create more. I'm the same way with a current series called The End.
Nice, nice. So we're gonna put on our tinfoil hats. I don't have one with me, but if you have one near you, put it on, people. So one thing I would like to know, and just you know, not only from your book, but just in general, what you think. What do you think aliens want, and what is their end game? Like,
Yeah. Well, the end game, at least in Dissonance, is their planet is threatened, and so they've come to ours for food and water. In space, we look like a really pretty rock with lots of water, lots of air, lots of food walking around. So they're predatory that way, and they're equipped to be predators. So I think the end game for them would be survival. I don't necessarily know that they're nefarious enough to assume that they want to conquer Earth and subdue our people as slaves for some building of some whatever. Who knows? I think the end game ultimately, though, is we are, if we kind of project ourselves onto them. The American Empire wants to expand, and we want to have our dominion. So did the Roman Empire. So did the Assyrian Empire. So did all of the empires. And so an alien empire simply wants to expand its territory, grow its people, its flock, and expand to new horizons so that you can accommodate all those people.
yeah. So let me ask you this though: there are billions of galaxies out there. There is life out there. You have to be a fool not to believe that there isn't. But here's where I have issues with what aliens want and what their end game is. So I've spoken to some authors who have been abducted, and I'll take their word for it. They don't seem like people who are making it up, and if they are, they're very creative, and I applaud them for that. And I've spoken to people who have had aliens for like spirit guides, if you want to call it that. And one told me their aliens are here to help us. Like, you're messing this up. Your planet is bad. And we got to help you.
Yeah.
And then others are here to study our weaknesses. And they're ready to come in, just like the Gorgons and everything, to come in and use our natural resources against us, use whatever against us. Do you lie on either side, or do you think you're kind of in the middle of what you think aliens want, just in general?
No, I love scenes like, and I think this is kind of this scene in this movie, and the movie itself has experienced a lot of flack over the years, but The Abyss with Ed Harris in the 90s, with that scene where he goes down into this kind of Atlantean scenery and terrain that's been underwater in like the Laurentian Abyss forever. He's overwhelmed, and basically they start showing him this footage of what they're going to do to mankind with these gigantic tidal waves, and they're going to wipe out mankind because we are wiping out ourselves. So and we're destroying the planet in the process, which is their planet. So you're endangering us, pal, is what they're saying. So they're trying to help us live in a better theme. They're trying to assist us, at least in that context, to adopt a better theme for life. Can we all get along? Rodney King theme.
Sure.
Not survival of the fittest, but just partnership, communion, fellowship, harmony, working together. And sadly, my books aren't Dissonance. The hexalogy is not a referendum on 24 or the current state of society, but really the worst enemy of man is not aliens. It's always man. And so you find that out as you go through the story. We just end up throwing each other under the bus. 16 years after an alien invasion, we're still doing it. We should be working together to boot these guys back into space. And that's just kind of where we're stuck right now as a species. So would they be here to encourage us, guide us, steer us back in the right direction? Versus would they be here to annihilate us? If they had been studying us for a while, if they were here to help us, it would mean that they'd been studying us for a while and they've been here and they know how we operate. They would have attacked already if their motive was that nefarious. So I don't know. I think stories can go either way. I like to think that maybe they'd be here to help us instead of just wiping us out. I think that's God's purview. It's wiping us out, not an alien species. Although he could
Yeah,
use one.
absolutely. So one thing that I think is really interesting is we have basically, well, the news, I guess, has basically said, yep, there's UFOs. And everybody went, uh-huh, okay. Does that strike you a little odd as, as an author and as a person that you're like, hey, like, forget it. How does that make you feel?
uh, I don't know. I think it's really arbitrary for people just to naturally assume that and then say, especially if you're a member of the media, you have great responsibility to do, factual, unbiased, unprejudiced recording, or reporting rather. So, man, I don't know. That really has come to the fore with the rise of the New Jersey drones and all that stuff.
Yes.
It just kind of gets resurrected again, and the alignment of the planets and everything. I think we're a deeply superstitious people anyway, so it really doesn't matter too much what the media says. We're going to
Yeah.
believe what we believe, even if it's, even if it's the most trusted commentator or news guy out there that we listen to every night. It's like, I don't know,
Yeah,
we're
right.
suspicious.
So let me ask you this too. You deal with the military in your books and everything like that. And obviously in your books, people, hey, they're aliens and this is what they're trying to do. They're invading us. But in the modern world, do you think the military will ever go like, okay, here you go. They're aliens. We got them in the refrigerator. And I'm being, sarcastic. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, just totally like, here you go. Let us peek behind the curtain and go, they've been doing what?
I think the military is under orders by the president and by Congress and by whoever else, the Illuminati of the world, to keep that stuff under wraps. So I don't think there'd ever be a fessing up because it just means you've been lying to us all this time, which is going to foment anti-military and anti-government sentiment. I think they'll just go on continuing to keep things secret. I like the fact that there is so much documented evidence out there of people saying that they've seen a UFO or they've seen the Loch Ness monster or a vampire or a Sasquatch or any of those things. I like that. I like that there's enough mounting dissent to the public media megaphone and say, no, you can't silence us. We've seen and heard with our own eyes. I think that's balance. That way provides good balance. But who's right and who's wrong in the end, time's going to reveal that. And I don't think it'll be for a while.
Yeah. I think another thing too about your story, I think is really interesting that I find kind of art imitates life, imitates art. Because there is government, supposedly, I believe it was Eisenhower, I always get the president wrong, but made a deal with the Greys to say, you give us some technology, and it's an actual treaty out there, and I'm blanking on it right now, I apologize, but an actual treaty, but you can take some of our people and, experiment, and you give us some technology. And I'm thinking, okay, if that is true, how wrong could that go? Because it's kind of like a boot meet anthill, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what is your, I'm guessing you didn't even think about this when you were writing the books, obviously, but was that anything in your books when you were writing, when you were just thinking like, how could the military do anything? How could they? I mean, it would be like me shooting oh my God, I'm dating myself again, a pea shooter at like a giant, right? I mean, it's not going
Yeah.
to do anything. I mean,
Right.
I'm wasting my time.
Yeah, when I was writing Dissonance, I never really had any possibility of any kind of supposition or suspicion as far as what the military is or isn't doing with regards to the aliens, because it was obvious they were there. They just showed up. They descended out of the skies one day, silently all over the planet, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And to deny their existence would have been futile because they're right there and they're hanging there for 90 days. So it was never any clash with the military or the powers that be that said, we know they're there, and somebody else going like, no, 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 you're seeing things, those aren't aliens, go back to your homes and watch, drink your Bud Light. It was nothing like that. There was never any premise allowable by that. So, and the fact that I basically, when I started out the series, was with Volume 1 Reality, which is this guy right here, which has been adapted for the screen and being pitched to streaming networks. Woohoo! Can't wait
Thank
for that one.
you. Congratulations. I was going to talk about that.
I had to plug that one. I know that was shameless. That
No,
one actually starts with action that they're already here. We know they're here. They've been attacking us and killing us off 85% of all mankind for 16 years now. So
mm-hmm.
there was never any plausible deniability on the part of anyone.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting about that too is, well, if you did that, I don't know why I always laugh at this, but I'm like, there's gonna be a hell of a mess. If there was 7.8 billion people on the planet, I think.
There's a lot of them now.
You wipe out 1 billion, that's just like me, like you're cleaning your kitchen table and you got like billions of kitchen tables to clean. I know that's a weird analogy, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, I just think that's super interesting. Like, I haven't read your books, but could you give us an insight in like how do they get rid of things? I'm just curious about that. That's something I always wondered.
How do the Gorgons get rid of things, or how do we get rid of the Gorgons?
Yeah, is it just a giant graveyard like Terminator, or is it like?
Yeah. Well, we're consumed, number one. So basically, when they awaken, there's enough of them all over the planet. What I like to do at vendor markets and craft fairs, when I tell this story to people who come up to know, what the book series is about, I love to pause, power pause, and say they show up by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Then you have this exponentially huger population hovering there in the sky. And so, that's a max. I would have just said 1 million if it was 1 million, but maybe it's 912,000. That's a lot of Gorgons all over the planet.
Right.
And what they have the ability to do, they show up one day, they hang there for 90 days. Our complacency kicks back in. Our guard is lowered. Mm-hmm. We get more comfortable with them there, even though we're not comfortable with them there. Mm-hmm. And so when they do attack, they catch us off guard, as they always are wont to do, because we don't take them seriously enough. So people aren't attacking them back. People aren't trying to take, them back, except when they're scampering. And by that time, a lot of us have been killed off. They're horrifyingly fast. So I had to wrestle with this scenario when I did the prequel, Volume 0 Revelation, which is where you're there when they arrive and when they attack, and in the ensuing years. I had to wrestle with how are the Gorgons going to, over 3 months' time, wipe out 85% of humanity and all animals. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a drive-by freezing, So they're not gonna. They're smart enough to know they're not going to be able to eat us all right away and sit there and feast. All the rest of us will run and hide and find shelter and get our guns and then attack them. They can be killed. So it's basically immobilization, and once you're immobilized, it's all over. You can't do anything. It's kind of like, I've heard of that drug Trank. There's another name for it, but the informal name is called Trank, where you're literally under such a it's a narcotic, I guess, but what it is you're frozen, you're tensed, and you're slooped over, and you're statuesque. So they're gonna freeze you. They're gonna move on. They're gonna freeze the next people. They're gonna move on, freeze the next people. And then they're just going to come back in another blanket across the planet. They're going to eat you at their leisure. You're still there weeks later. You may have died just from immobility.
Yeah, that's frightening. So do you do any speaking of events, Aaron? Like, talk about your book and anything like that? Okay.
Yeah, craft fairs and vendor markets, but I'm actually speaking at Doxicon on February 8th. It's a conference up here in Woodinville near Seattle. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to be on the, now I'm drawing a blank. It's the big one in Seattle, NorwestCon, coming up in April, I believe.
Nice. And we'll talk about that before we wrap up the show, so you can give all my spooky friends, hey, if they live in the area, because we do have listeners in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, do you have people coming up to you and being like, Aaron, you know what? It's true. And you're like, what's true? The Gorgons, they're true. I saw them do it. Do you ever have, you were talking a little bit about that, like, hey, man, but do you honestly have people coming up to you a little bit more? And do you have a weird story, maybe, or a funny story that you could share with my spooky friends? Like, you were like, I don't know what to
Well,
tell you.
honestly, this is going to sound a little bit maybe like crazy. I may be diagnosable with this. I just remember I actually took a pilgrimage to Clarksville, Tennessee, and Blue Spring, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee, a Labor Day weekend this past year, and that's where my stories take place primarily. So I wanted to go there. It was well after the overwhelming majority of the books had been written. In fact, I think all of them had been written except for the prequel, the sequel. And I really wanted to go because there were elements of one of the prequels that I wanted to make sure were correct, but I also wanted to walk the very grounds where my protagonists and other characters walked. So to be there and know that these were real places, which I knew, in fleshing out the narratives of the books, I wrote them with a very gritty sense of reality and used actual streets and actual businesses and actual establishments in 2026, and they're abandoned 16 years later in 2042, but they're all real places. So if there's anybody who would come to me and say, man, Gorgons exist, it's me. you know I find myself driving along, on the highway on a blue sunny day and imagining these things just descending out of the
Mm,
sky. I know I'm going to
yeah.
plow into somebody one of these days, but
I mean,
it's
that's
it's
your insurance agent.
yeah, it's what is it? The unconscious intrudes upon the conscious. You
Hmm.
know, there's this overlap that you don't really intend, but you're so immersed in the story and you want it to be real. I want the characters to be real. I want the struggle to be real. I want the victory to be real. I don't know if I want the Gorgons to be real because they're terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you talk to some guys saying they're abducted, and you're trying to, like, that's great. I think that's really interesting because there are stories where I believe in the person that this happened, but I think it's few and far between. But again, I've spoke to a couple of people who authors. One is, her name is Karen Wilkinson, and she said when she was a teenager, she was abducted pretty much every night, and she could feel
Mm.
it. She could feel everything. And the
Wow.
vivid, I mean, for her to make that up, it was to me like, wow, and she takes it seriously. And, we talked about it, and, she was getting very emotional. So I'm like, I couldn't even imagine, that happening for real,
Yeah.
with your book, it's imagine, and that's scary enough. But let me ask you this: when you were writing the book, did you ever? Because I know this sounds strange. When I'm doing my research for my shows, sometimes I feel like someone's watching me, or I feel like weird, especially with the topic I'm doing. Like, I've done topics about like exorcism and stuff, and I just feel like somebody's you feel weird, right? Has that ever
Right.
happened to you when you were writing your book and you were like, whoa, what's going on here?
Buddy, I'm Rockwell. I always feel like somebody's watching me. Um, I do. There's maybe a little bit of schizophrenia there, but I think that actually fuels, and that's probably part of conditioning of being a voiceover artist. You're actually trained to, by some coaches, I should say, you're trained to pretend like you're actually delivering to somebody live all the time. So while my book is not live at the moment while I'm writing it, it becomes live upon publishing. But while it's not live, I'm imagining, there's these people that are around me and they're reading it with me and just they're being equally as phased or moved or stunted or impassioned or emboldened or whatever that I'm feeling. So I think there's maybe a little bit of healthy schizophrenia in every writer's odyssey. Maybe there should be, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The other thing too, one of the things too with writing, I notice and stuff like that, and talking about things, there's things called topas. And I don't know if you ever heard of topas, but basically it's something the collective imagination keeps imagining this, and the collective power that's what they think like Bigfoot is, Loch Ness. And so, what do you think of that? Is that something you've ever thought about? Maybe writing about, or when you're writing, maybe you were like, I wonder what people would think when they read this book. Are they starting to imagine what you hope? Because then they want to read more, but imagine the Gorgons coming down and everything.
Yeah. I think, well, again, I hate to draw a parallel as a voiceover artist, but our goal is to transport people as voiceover artists to tell them a story. And people love being told stories. We've loved being told stories since the dawn of time. And I love that as the job, the career paths that I have, they're in parallel. And I'm a
Mhm.
dual storyteller. So in the one, I'm entrusted to tell other people's stories as a voiceover artist. In there, I'm telling my own stories, and I much prefer this one. I mean, let's be real honest, because the creativity that I get to inject into both, but far and away more in this one, allows me to transport people and to take them places where if they want to believe the Gorgons exist, more power to you. Go to where you believe that this land exists. That's the reason why we return to these stories and read them over and over and over again, is because we want them to be real. There's a tangible, visceral experience that we have in reading this book that 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 takes us places and that we want to experience over and over and over again because it's just such a great experience.
Yeah,
We want
yeah,
that.
yeah, and that's why I think Alien. We were talking about that. With aliens, so on and so forth, keeps going. Alien Covenant,
Yeah.
Alien Romulus keeps going is because, like you said, we can imagine that, right? Being on that space station and having these aliens basically using us to, I don't know, impregnate themselves, and I think that's really cool. That still scares us even in this world and everything like that.
Yeah.
And do you think that's, I don't want to say the perfect movie, but do you have a sci-fi movie where you think is like, yeah, I think this what really happened. This might be the close to how it would happen. Not saying perfect, but close to how it might happen in reality.
So that's really good. A really good question. Excuse me. I absolutely love the movie Contact, and
Yeah,
I'm
so do I.
honestly, as a writer, I'm much more drawn and inspired by movies than I am by other people's works. I just have always been that way. So other people's literary works, I should say. So it's always really cool reading someone else's works because then you get into their mind and you go, wow, you're just as weird as I am and creative as I am and stuff. But I'm much always been much more inspired visually. So that's why movies are just a much more powerful form of inspiration for me. I love Contact. I think that it's, in terms of hard science fiction, truths that are present in there, the scientific research and the plausibility of some, whatever, some being or force or race or society imparting information to us so that we can build a transporter and travel all the way through the galaxy to the Vega system. It could be. I mean, something like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
could feasibly happen. And so
yeah.
I think it's a great story. I think it was riveting the whole way through. I don't know that it got really high marks in terms of acting or anything else, but I love that movie.
Yeah, yeah. Not to go on a tangent, but we tend to do this on this podcast. The only problem I had is when they blow up the device, whatever you want to call it, and then they just have another device.
Yeah, the
I got one in my back
Japanese.
pocket. Here you go. Come on.
Yeah,
What are we doing?
yeah,
Stop it.
yeah.
That to me was like, you know,
That's fair. That's
it's
fair.
like no one would notice. Like the government would be like, wait a minute, you're building the same thing we're building. Yeah, shut up. I guess you're gonna need it. But again, with Contact, I think that would really happen. I think there would be a person who would blow that up because they're like, no, there is a God, there is, religion, not to bring religion into this, but right? Somebody would do that. That's why I love that movie too. Like it kind of it plays to our sensibilities as human beings. Is like, wait a minute, you're telling me there's something else out there?
Right.
No, so No.
Well,
So
I love the line. It's such a good line in that movie, and kind of pertains to any movie where you're dealing with just the vastness of space. Who was it? Ellie Arroway is Jodie Foster's character, and she says, she's talking to her dad when they're out one night, before he dies with their telescope.
yeah.
Not that he dies with their telescope, that was said improperly, but they're with the telescope looking out in space, whatever, and he dies later. There we go. But she says something to him, and he says, well, if it is just us, it seems like an awful waste of space, or something like that. He said, I
Hmm.
love that. I think
I
that
love that.
without bringing religion into it as well, but God is big enough to bring into being another race, another civilization, another humanity on another planet. And who's to say that he
Absolutely.
didn't? And whatever the humanity looks like, acts like, sounds like, talks like, we might run into him someday and go, wow, you're different. You're an alien. And they're going to say, no, you're an alien.
Yeah,
Pretty
absolutely.
cool.
So, being this my podcast, I have to say what my favorite sci-fi movie is, and I love old movies. My mom and I used to watch old movies all the time, and I love my mom who passed away a while ago, but she would watch old movies together. And my favorite one is The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original one,
Yeah.
because I love the beginning. They land the UFO, and if you haven't seen it, go see it. And I know you're going to go, it's black and white. Or,
Right.
wait a minute, should I watch the one with Keanu Reeves? No, no, no. Watch the original.
Yeah.
And they land, and the alien comes out. And what do they immediately do? They shoot it. He's holding, kind of looks like a gun. No, okay, I'll give him that. And then he's like, "Yeah, this would have helped you cure cancers. And you
Yeah.
blew
Yeah.
it up.
See, you blew it.
Thanks a
Yep.
lot." And I think that's exactly what we would do. I think an alien would land. He'd be he or she or whatever you want to say would be like, okay, here, yeah, carrying something that looks like a weapon or a bomb and saying, okay, this is gonna cure. Bam, we shoot
Right.
it or whatever.
Yeah.
I
Oh
think that's
no.
gonna. I think that's gonna happen. And the other thing I loved about that movie was when he's trying to get an audience with all the presidents and prime ministers all over the world, and they're like, I will not come to the United States. I will not come here. I will not go to Russia. And he's like, children, you're nothing but children, because they're
Right.
so advanced. And I think that's what I think kind of a combination of contact and something like this where aliens would be like, and we talked about it, where they'd be like, you are children. What are you doing? Right. And I think I always find that fascinating.
It reminds me. There's a line in Ruthless People, which is another older movie from the '80s. Although Day
Yes.
the Earth Stood Still came before that, of course. But I love the line. Judge Reinhold plays this kidnapper of Helen. She played Supergirl. I can't remember her last name. Uh, Helen something or other. She,
Yeah.
he was a kidnapper of her, and he's just Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not Judge Reinhold. It is the guy who played the president in Independence Day. Um,
Bill Pullman.
Bill Pullman. He is a kidnapper, and he's really dumb. He just low intellect. And at one point, the cops, as they're trying to negotiate with him, and he just is not playing right and not understanding anything they're saying. But the cop goes, "This may very well be the stupidest person on the face of the earth. Perhaps we should
I love
shoot him." And I love that that is actually an option that comes into his brain. Maybe we should shoot him. And you can imagine the aliens thinking that too. You're just children.
it.
Maybe we should shoot you.
Maybe
Maybe
we
we
should
should.
shoot them, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I just wanted to do a couple of things before you talk about a little bit about congratulations, like I said, turning into a movie and everything. But you have written children's books, so I'm going to give you
Yeah.
like a couple minutes to talk about that because obviously I have all different ages listening to this podcast. Could you talk a little bit about your children's books? I think that's an
Uh,
interesting thing. Deadly aliens, and hey, let's talk about kids.
It's funny. I mean, it's hard saying what I've written because honestly, the children's books are of a faith nature. And on the front, I'm saying, best-selling author of the Alien Invasion sci-fi series Dissonance and the 9/11 historical fiction thriller Forecast, which have nothing to do with faith-based children's books. Um, I wasn't ever going to write a children's book. I just, I'm a storyteller. I'm telling my 8-year-old a story, and it was bedtime, and so this is you can't actually. You can probably see him on my camera here. Yeah. So Brennan is this one. He's my 8-year-old, almost 9-year-old, and Asher
Nice.
is 5. So I'm telling Brennan, my 8-year-old, this story one night in bed, and it was either incredibly inspiring and peaceful or incredibly boring because he fell asleep as I was telling it to him. But whatever, I'm fine. It's okay. And I I just came away from that story going, wow, God, that was amazing. Help me to remember that. And I pulled away and I wrote it down as best as I could remember and recapture it, and just was really blown away grateful for how beautiful the story was. I know that as a kid, I struggled with, feelings of shame. If I ever did anything wrong, I was a bad person,
Mm.
right? We are very clear with both of our boys that if you ever do something wrong, and you will, you're human,
Yeah.
we're upset with what you did, not with who you are. You're not
Yeah.
a bad person. What you did might be bad, but you're not a bad person. So I was telling him that story, and I just needed to put that story in print. So it became the Ring of Truth. And I don't know how I didn't see this coming, man. I should have seen this coming, but I presented the Ring of Truth to Brennan. I showed it to him, and what does my 5-year-old do? He goes, "That's great, Daddy. Where's mine?" And I was like, "How did I not see that coming?" Like, it's
Yeah.
just, you should
Yeah.
anticipate that kind of stuff. So that begat the sequel to it, which is the Sword of Joy, which just deals with being honest about your emotions, and it's okay to be sad, it's okay to cry. So there's that one, and then I wrote a third one called the Book of Power, and they all became a series together.
Nice.
It's a weird expedition to go into a children's book realm because it's not ever where I thought I would go, but it's cool to have gone there, and I think you should be as
Yeah.
versatile as possible and adapt as much as you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, can you, for my spooky friends, give us an update on Dissonance and where is it, at right now as far as what you're pitching with it and stuff? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a screenwriter, you understand some of this, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah.
I was marketed to in March, I believe, of last year, and I was a cynic right away. Like, who are you? Who is this guy? And his assistant reached out to me. It's Alan Roth
Nice.
with Act Two Media,
Nice.
and he was one of 5 winners of a contest put on by Gaylan Hurd, who is the ex-wife of James Cameron. I know who's that, and he won that contest with his screenplay of Jersey City Story, one of 5
Nice.
winners. So I vetted him. I said, how much does it cost to produce a screenplay? I Googled it. It was between here and here. He was right here in the middle. And
Nice.
I've talked to other screenwriters about Forecast as well. Their price is roughly the same. So,
Hmm.
anyway, that just kind of validated it. But
Yeah.
he was
Right.
very collaborative. We had monthly meetings where he would present to me what he had written more for the pilot. And he had made some changes. I was like,
Yeah.
can
Right.
you,
Yeah.
and
Right.
he changed them back. So he listened to me, changed him back, but he's been actively pitching. The screenplay is done, the pilot is done, the treatment is done, the character Bible is done, and he pitches. He's done probably 10 pitches so far. No one has said no except for 2 actors. He went the actors route to try to attach them
Sure. Yep.
to the
Good idea.
project. And 2 or 3 of them actually said no, one just because of busyness. But I was like, hey, I got rejected by John Hamm. That's so cool.
Hey,
Like,
good for
I'll take it.
you. You will take it.
And Dylan Sprouse and Eric Bana. I was like, bring on the rejections, man. That's pretty
Bring
cool.
them on. I love it. I love it. Yeah, to even get that far, Aaron, I applaud you. It's tough out there, but I wish you much success with that. So,
Thank
what
you.
else do you got coming up? You're talking about you're going to be at some, different events and everything. Tell my spooky friends so they can come out and say hi and tell you they've been abducted by aliens. I mean, don't do that or do
Yeah.
that. I don't know.
Well, I will be at Doxicon. I'll be at Barnes and Noble in Kirkland on February 1st, signing books again. And February 8th, I'll be at Doxicon in Woodinville. I believe it's doxiconseattle.com if I'm understanding it correctly. And it is like the intersection of where like sci-fi meets faith, I believe is the overall theme. So looking forward to that, and I'm going to be a panelist there and a booth vendor. And then on the writing front, I was really motivated to begin writing a clean Christian fiction trilogy that deals with the apocalypse or the end times, not the Left Behind series of the 90s, although I loved that. I thought it was brilliantly done, but mine is a twist on that. It is post-apocalyptic. It is very dystopian and has been a big challenge, but I love where it's going. And I'm at 200 and I think I'm 276 pages so far on volume 1. So it's closing in on the finish line, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, I love that because again, it takes so much to take the blank page and put something on it, and then you're like, "Oh, this is terrible," This, and then you go back and you're like, "Oh, this isn't so bad." How to deal with it. So before we wrap up here too, because I do have authors, because that's what obviously I have authors on, which I had you, but I do have authors who do listen to this or aspiring authors. What would you say to them? Someone getting started. We kind of talked about like, yeah, not a lot of people follow through with it. But what would you say was your main motivator to kind of like push through when there was kind of like, maybe not?
Yeah. Well, I was given excellent advice that I will pass on to anybody and everybody if they ask. It was life-changing advice. It was given to me in the context of voiceovers, not authoring, but it applies so much to authoring. The advice was someone's endorsement of you or lack thereof has very little to do with your trajectory. And my a former voiceover agent turned entrepreneur friend of mine said that to me, and I basically was like, say that again. So I want to write that down. It just impressed upon me so much, and so I had to repeat it. I was like, that's huge and life
Yeah,
changing.
yeah,
And so it applies so much to authors because we want our books to be sold. If they're not selling, someone's endorsement has very little to do with our trajectory. If we get a bad review, doesn't matter. Someone's endorsement of us or lack thereof has very little to do with our trajectory. If we are called upon to speak or getting interviews or anything like that, or we're not, someone's endorsement of us or lack thereof has very little to do with our trajectory. My trajectory is forward and up, regardless of what people say about me or my books. So you really have to develop thick skin in this industry and let a lot of stuff roll off your back because you'll never get further than the table of contents. If you don't do
yeah,
that.
yeah. Absolutely. That is great advice. And thank you for taking time out to be on the show. We talked about a variety of topics, which I love. I hope none of what you're writing comes true, other than
Me too.
success. Other
Yeah.
than success, I will say that. And I look forward to we'll have to keep updating one another to see where you are with your project, because maybe
Yeah.
be on a streaming service I can go check out and tell my spooky friends. But spooky friends
Knock knock.
know this. All Aaron's links will be on there, so you can read his fascinating books. I'm getting them myself. I'm ordering them off Amazon, but
Thank you.
whatever you would like to do. And again, if you're in the area, go see Aaron, support him. Independent authors are the lifeblood, in my opinion, of not only books but just media in general. There's a lot of big things out there. I'm not trying to hate on them, but without independent authors and independent visionaries like Aaron here, we wouldn't have great writers like Tolkien and Clancy and King and on and on and on and on. They started just where Aaron was and grew just like Aaron was, and he will continue to grow. So again, thank you so much and taking time. Like I said, this was awesome. I could talk to you a lot more. And again, hopefully, maybe I'll have you back on the show sometime when you have more success, and we can talk about that movie or streaming series or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I'd love that. And if you or anybody else want to visit me or check out the blog or email, I love mail. You can visit me at authoraaronryan.com. I love to
Yep.
talk to readers and anybody I can.
I was just about to ask that. You read my mind. Oh, maybe you're an alien. Maybe you're not really Aaron. Uh, I was
I
going to
am
say, yeah,
Aaron Ryan. I promise.
I knew it.
Whip off the mask.
Above the mask, and you got like blood and eyeballs and like
And
a
I would
big
have
steel
succeeded
mouth.
too if it hadn't been for you meddling kids.
Awesome. So yes, reach out to Aaron, and I'm sure he would love to hear from you. So thank you so much, Aaron. And like I said, I wish you much success, and hopefully we'll get back here in the future.
You too. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. Have a great one. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.